Black waitress donates blood to an emergency patient, unaware he's a billionaire, and return with a proposal. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour diner hummed a weary, buzzing dirge over the greasy tabletops and cracked vinyl booths. For Alara, wiping down the last counter at 2 a.m., it was the sound of survival. Outside, a bitter November wind howled through the city canyons, rattling the glass and making her thin sweater feel like tissue paper. Her feet ached, a deep, pulsating throb that had become as familiar as the scent of stale coffee and fried onions. Every muscle screamed for the lumpy mattress in her tiny apartment, but her mind was a frantic abacus, calculating tips against the rent that was already 3 days late, the cost of her son Leo's cough medicine, the price of a half-gallon of milk. She was losing. The numbers never added up. Her worn-out sneakers, a size too big and stuffed with newspaper to fill the gap, were a testament to a life lived on the margins, a life of making do and going without. The exhaustion was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her. Just as she was about to switch off the neon open sign, the diner door flew open with a crash, letting in a swirl of icy air and a woman in blue scrubs, her face a mask of controlled panic. "We need O-negative blood now. Does anyone have it?" The nurse's voice cut through the diner's sleepy quiet like a siren. Her eyes darted around the empty room, landing on Alara and Mel, the grizzled cook already halfway out the back door. Mel just grunted and shook his head, pulling his coat tighter. But Alara froze, her hand hovering over the light switch. O-negative, the universal donor, the rare, precious gift flowing through her own veins. Every instinct screamed for her to go home, to collapse into bed and let the world fend for itself for a few precious hours. She had given all she had to give. Her energy was gone, her meager earnings for the night barely enough to cover bus fare. She had nothing left. How could she possibly know that this one final, selfless act, a simple gift she asked nothing for in return, would not be an ending but the beginning of a story so extraordinary it would rewrite her entire destiny? Without a second thought, she dropped the cleaning rag on the counter. "I do," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the sudden stillness. "I'm O-negative." The nurse's shoulders sagged with visible relief. Thank God. There was a multi-car pileup on the interstate. The hospital's blood bank is depleted. He's critical. Please, can you come? It's just across the street. Alara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her threadbare coat from the hook, the one with the torn lining that did little to stop the wind. She thought of Leo, sleeping soundly at her neighbor's apartment, his small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. She was doing this for a stranger, but in her heart, she felt a strange connection to the act itself, a universal prayer for all people to be safe, for all children to have their parents come home. She followed the nurse out into the biting wind, the diner's warm, greasy air replaced by the sterile urgency of the hospital. The hallways were a blur of white walls and rushing figures. She was guided into a small, curtained-off area. Her arm was swabbed with cold antiseptic, and she felt the familiar sharp prick of the needle. As her blood, dark and rich, began to flow into the collection bag, she closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer for the unknown man whose life now depended on this gift. She never asked for his name. She never saw his face. When it was over, she accepted a small cup of juice and a cookie, waved off the nurse's effusive thanks, and walked back out into the cold, unforgiving night, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. She was just a waitress, a mother, a tired soul who had done one small, right thing in a world that often felt so wrong. She pulled her thin coat tighter and started the long walk to the bus stop, the few dollars in her pocket a stark reminder of the reality that would greet her in the morning. 2 days later, the reality was a bright red eviction notice taped to her apartment door. The landlord, a man with a perpetually sour expression, had finally lost his patience. Alara's heart plummeted into her stomach. She had begged him for one more week, just until her next paycheck, but the notice felt brutally final. She sank onto the top step of the grimy stairwell, the crinkled paper trembling in her hand. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She had failed. She had failed Leo. How could she protect him when she couldn't even keep a roof over his head? It was in that moment of absolute despair that a man in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He looked utterly out of place in the derelict building, his polished shoes reflecting the dim, flickering light of the hallway bulb. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Are you Ms. Alara Jones?" Alara quickly wiped her eyes, startled. "Yes? Who's asking?" "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Julian Vance." He ascended the stairs, his expression unreadable. "My employer was the recipient of a blood donation 2 nights ago. He is eager to express his gratitude in a more substantial way." He held out a slim, elegant envelope. Alara could see through the small window that it contained a check. A check with a staggering number of zeros. Her mind reeled. Julian Vance. The name echoed in her memory. Vance Industries. He was a titan of industry, a recluse, a billionaire whose face was occasionally plastered on the cover of business magazines. That was who she had saved. Arthur extended the envelope again. "Mr. Vance insists. He feels he owes you his life and wishes to ensure you are properly compensated for your extraordinary kindness." This was it. The solution to everything. The rent, food for the month, a new coat for Leo, maybe even a small toy. It was a miracle dropped from the sky. But as she looked at the envelope, something inside her recoiled. A quiet but fierce wave of pride. She had given her blood freely, an act of pure human decency. To accept money for it felt wrong. It would tarnish the one good, clean thing she had done in a long time. She thought of the lesson she was trying to teach Leo. That kindness was its own reward, that you help people not for what you can get, but because it's who you are. Taking this money would make her a hypocrite. She pushed his hand away gently, shaking her head. The eviction notice felt heavier than ever in her other hand. "No, thank you, but I can't accept that." Arthur blinked, genuinely surprised. It was a reaction he was clearly not accustomed to. "Ms. Jones, I assure you, this is a negligible amount for Mr. Vance. He truly wants you to have it." "I'm sure he does," Alara said, her voice gaining strength. "And I appreciate the thought more than you know. But I didn't do it for money. I did it because someone needed help. That's all. Please, tell Mr. Vance that I am just glad he's okay. That's all the thanks I need." She stood up, clutching the eviction notice behind her back as if to hide her desperation. Her integrity was the only real currency she possessed, and she would not sell it, not even for this. Arthur studied her for a long moment, a flicker of admiration in his professional gaze. He finally nodded, retracting the envelope. "As you wish, Ms. Jones," he said, his tone softening. "I will relay your message to Mr. Vance." He turned and descended the stairs, leaving Alara alone with her principles and the stark, terrifying reality of her situation. She watched him go, a part of her screaming that she was a fool, that she had just thrown away her only chance. But another, deeper part of her felt a profound sense of peace. She might be poor, she might be about to be homeless, but she was not for sale. Back in his sterile, white hospital room, overlooking the city from the penthouse floor, Julian Vance listened to Arthur's report. A broken arm was in a sling, and a line of stitches traced a path across his temple. But his mind was sharp, his gaze intense. He had been staring at the skyline for an hour, the city lights a cold, indifferent constellation. The crash had been a blur of screeching metal and shattering glass. Another dark chapter in a life already defined by loss. He had survived. Again. And for a moment he wasn't sure if he was grateful. But Arthur's words pierced through his apathy. "She refused the check, sir," Arthur said, placing the untouched envelope on the bedside table. "She said she was simply glad you were recovering, and that was thanks enough." Julian turned his head, his gray eyes narrowing with interest. In his world, everything had a price. Every favor came with an expectation. Every kindness was an investment. People fawned over him, schemed for a piece of his fortune, lied to get his attention. But this woman, this complete stranger who had literally given him her life's blood, wanted nothing. It was an anomaly, a variable he couldn't compute. It intrigued him more than any billion-dollar merger. "Find out everything about her," Julian commanded, his voice raspy but firm. "Her name is Alara Jones. I want to know where she lives, where she works, what she needs. Everything." The next day, Arthur returned with a thin file. The contents painted a bleak picture. Alara Jones, 28, single mother to a 5-year-old son, Leo, worked double shifts at the diner, lived in a condemned building, and was currently facing eviction. The file contained a grainy photo of her leaving the diner, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, and another of a bright-eyed little boy with a gap-toothed smile, holding her hand. Julian stared at the boy's face, and a sharp, forgotten pain lanced through his chest. He saw the ghost of another small hand in his, another joyful smile. He closed his eyes, pushing the memory away. This woman who had so little had given him so much, and she had asked for nothing. He couldn't let it stand. But another check would be an insult to her pride. He needed a different approach. An idea began to form, a plan that was part gratitude, part curiosity, and part a desperate, unacknowledged need to bring some small measure of warmth into his own cold, empty life. He dispatched Arthur again, this time with a different kind of offer. Arthur found Alara packing her meager belongings into cardboard boxes, her face pale and strained. Leo was trying to help, carefully placing his worn teddy bear into a box of pots and pans. "Ms. Jones," Arthur began, his presence once again a stark contrast to the crumbling apartment. "Mr. Vance was moved by your refusal. He understands your position. Therefore, he would like to make you a proposition, not of charity, but of employment." Alara paused, a stack of chipped plates in her hands. "Employment? I have a job. A job that is insufficient to provide for you and your son," Arthur stated, not unkindly. "Mr. Vance is still in recovery. He requires assistance at his home. Personal aid of sorts. Someone to manage his household schedule, liaise with staff, and be on hand. The position comes with a generous salary and, more importantly, accommodation. There is a small, fully furnished guest house on his estate. It would be yours, for as long as you hold the position." Alara stared at him, her mind struggling to process the offer. A real job, a salary, a home, a safe place for Leo. It was everything she had been praying for. But it felt too good to be true. To work for him, to live on his property. It felt like a gilded cage, another form of payment she had already refused. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why me? You could hire anyone. Mr. Vance values integrity above all else," Arthur replied smoothly. "He believes a person who would give so selflessly and expect nothing in return is precisely the kind of person he can trust. He is not offering you a handout, Ms. Jones. He is offering you an opportunity. For your son." The last 3 words hit their mark. She looked at Leo, who was now trying to fit his small body into an empty box, giggling. This wasn't about her pride anymore. It was about his future. It was about giving him a warm bed, a yard to play in, a life free from the constant, grinding fear of poverty. For Leo, she could swallow her pride. For Leo, she could do anything. She took a deep breath, her decision made. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I accept." The Vance estate was less a home and more a small kingdom. A long, winding driveway cut through acres of manicured lawns and ancient oak trees, leading to a sprawling mansion of glass and stone that overlooked a private, shimmering lake. It was a world away from the cracked pavement and graffiti-stained walls of her old neighborhood. The guest house Alara and Leo were shown to was a charming stone cottage, larger and more luxurious than any apartment she had ever lived in. It had a small garden out back, a modern kitchen stocked with food, and a cozy bedroom for Leo filled with brand-new toys and books. Leo was ecstatic, running from room to room with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. For Alara, it was overwhelming. The sheer scale of the wealth was disorienting. She felt like an imposter, a sparrow who had accidentally flown into an eagle's nest. Her duties, as outlined by Arthur, were simple enough: coordinate Mr. Vance's physical therapy appointments, manage his household messages, and ensure the kitchen was stocked. The main house staff, a stoic housekeeper named Mrs. Gable and a private chef, handled everything else. Her first few meetings with Julian Vance were brief and formal. He was an intimidating presence, even when recovering. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. He rarely smiled, and his voice was a low, quiet rumble that carried an unmistakable air of command. He was polite but distant, his conversations limited to her duties. A wall of impenetrable grief and solitude surrounded him, and Alara sensed it was a wall he had built brick by brick over many years. She kept her interactions professional, focusing on her tasks and, most importantly, on Leo. It was Leo, in his innocence, who first began to chip away at that wall. Unintimidated by Julian's wealth or his somber demeanor, Leo saw only a man who lived in a very big house with a very big yard. One sunny afternoon, while Alara was on a conference call organizing Julian's schedule, Leo slipped out of the cottage with his box of crayons and a drawing pad. He made his way to the main house's vast stone patio, where Julian was sitting in a lounge chair, staring blankly at the lake. Leo walked right up to him and held out a piece of paper. On it was a wobbly, crayon-drawn picture of a yellow sun, a blue house, and two stick figures. One was small with a wild scribble of black hair. The other was very, very tall. "This is for you," Leo announced proudly. "It's me and you. We're friends." Julian looked down at the drawing, then at the small boy staring up at him with earnest, trusting eyes. A complex storm of emotions churned within him. He hadn't been this close to a child in 5 years. The pain was immediate, a physical clenching in his chest. But beneath the pain was something else, a flicker of warmth. This child wasn't a ghost. He was real, solid, and offering a gift with no agenda. Julian took the drawing, his large hand surprisingly gentle. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "It's a very fine drawing." From that day on, a subtle shift occurred. Leo became a regular visitor to the main house. He would bring Julian his drawings, tell him rambling stories about his day, and ask him 1,000 questions that only a 5-year-old could conjure. "Why is the sky blue? Do fish get sleepy? Do you have a mommy?" Alara tried to keep him from bothering Julian, but Julian surprised her by allowing, and even seeming to welcome, the interruptions. He started to spend less time locked in his study and more time on the patio or by the lake, where he could watch Leo play. He never joined in, but he watched. Alara saw the way his gaze would soften when Leo laughed, the way a sad, wistful smile would touch his lips for a fleeting moment. He was like a man thawing out after being frozen for a very long time, and Leo was the sun. Alara, in turn, began to see the man behind the billionaire. She saw the deep weariness in his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hand when he thought no one was looking. She brought him his tea one afternoon and found him staring at a framed photograph on his desk. A beautiful woman with a warm smile and a little girl with bright, laughing eyes who looked no older than Leo. He didn't move to hide it. "My wife, Isabella, and my daughter, Lily," he said, his voice quiet and heavy. "They were lost 5 years ago." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken grief. Alara's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. He nodded, not looking at her. "Leo reminds me of her. Lily. She had that same fearlessness, that same joy." It was the first time he had volunteered anything personal, the first crack in his carefully constructed armor. Alara simply stood there, her presence a quiet offering of support. She didn't offer platitudes or try to fill the silence. She just shared the space with him, acknowledging his pain without judgment. In that moment, the dynamic between them changed from employer and employee to something more human, more fragile. They were two lonely people, each scarred by life in their own way, finding a strange, unspoken comfort in the quiet spaces of a grand, empty house, brought together by the innocent love of a little boy. The bond between them deepened one rain-swept evening. A thunderstorm raged outside, the wind howling and rattling the great windows of the mansion. The storm triggered something in Leo, who woke from a deep sleep screaming from a nightmare. Alara rushed to his side, holding him close, whispering soothing words as he sobbed into her shoulder. "It was dark, Mommy. I was all alone." "Shoo, baby, I'm here. You're safe. Mommy's right here." She rocked him gently, her own heart aching at his fear. A soft knock came at the cottage door. It was Julian, holding a large umbrella, his silhouette framed by the flashing lightning. He had seen the lights go on and heard the faint sound of crying. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. "Just a bad dream," Alara explained, trying to calm a still hiccuping Leo. Julian stepped inside, his presence filling the small living room. He looked at the frightened child in Alara's arms, and a profound, haunting sadness washed over his features. The sterile control he usually maintained seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a raw, unguarded vulnerability. He knelt so he was at eye level with Leo. "I used to get nightmares too," he said softly. "My daughter, Lily, she taught me a trick. She would draw a picture of the scary thing, and then we would draw a big, strong cage around it, to trap it, so it couldn't get out of the paper." Leo looked at him, his tear-filled eyes wide with interest. "Really?" Julian nodded. "Really?" He stayed for nearly an hour, sitting on the floor with Leo and a box of crayons, helping him draw his shadow monster, and then meticulously drawing a thick, inescapable cage around it. He was patient and gentle, his deep voice a calming anchor in the storm. Alara watched them, a lump forming in her throat. She saw not a billionaire CEO, but a father, a grieving man reaching out from his own darkness to comfort a small, frightened child. After Leo had finally drifted back to sleep, his caged monster drawing clutched in his hand, Alara walked Julian to the door. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond his help with Leo. "That was incredibly kind." Julian stood in the doorway, not moving to leave. He stared out into the rain-soaked darkness, his shoulders slumped. "The crash, the one you saved me from," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "It was the 5th anniversary of their deaths. I was driving back from the cemetery. The roads were wet. I wasn't paying attention. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. This was the first twist, the key that unlocked the mystery of his sorrow. It wasn't just a car accident. It was a pilgrimage of grief that had ended in more trauma. His survival was tangled up with the anniversary of their deaths, a cruel irony that must have felt like a punishment. "I don't know why I survived," he continued, his voice breaking. "Not then. Not this time. It should have been me." Alara's heart shattered for him. She saw the immense weight of survivor's guilt he carried, a burden far heavier than any fortune. Instinctively, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. The fabric of his expensive suit was damp from the rain, but beneath it, she could feel the tension in his muscles. "You survived because you were meant to," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You survived because there's still a purpose for you here." Leo, he sees it. He doesn't see a billionaire or a man in pain. He just sees Julian, a friend. He finally turned to look at her, his gray eyes shimmering with unshed tears. In that moment, the vast chasm of wealth and status that separated them disappeared. They were just two people in the quiet aftermath of a storm, connected by a shared understanding of loss and a nascent, fragile hope. He gave her a small, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the comfort she had offered. He then turned and walked back through the rain to the main house, leaving Alara with the profound sense of a wall not just cracking, but beginning to crumble. After that stormy night, the atmosphere on the estate transformed. The unspoken grief that had haunted the halls of the mansion began to recede, replaced by the warmth of a burgeoning connection. Julian no longer confined himself to his study or the solitary contemplation of the lake. He started actively seeking out Alara and Leo's company. He would appear at the cottage in the morning, ostensibly to discuss his schedule, but would end up staying for coffee, listening as Leo chattered on about his dreams. He invited them for dinner in the main house, not in the cavernous, formal dining room, but in the cozy breakfast nook overlooking the gardens. The chef, initially bewildered by the request for macaroni and cheese, soon found himself preparing simple, family-style meals. Laughter, a sound that had been absent from the house for 5 long years, began to echo through the rooms. Julian's laughter was a rusty, hesitant sound at first, but with each passing day, it grew more natural, more full. He taught Leo how to skip stones across the lake, his large hand guiding Leo's small one, demonstrating the perfect flick of the wrist. He would spend hours with the boy, answering his endless questions, his patience seemingly infinite. Alara would watch them from a distance, her heart swelling with a confusing mix of gratitude, affection, and something deeper, something she was afraid to name. She saw the healing that Leo's innocent love was bringing to this broken man, and in turn, she saw the profound gift Julian was giving her son, the gift of a stable, kind, and present male figure in his life. One afternoon, as they were tending to the small rose garden behind the cottage, Julian opened up to her again. He spoke of Isabella, his late wife, not with the raw pain of his initial confession, but with a gentle, loving nostalgia. He told her how they had met in college, how she had been a brilliant architect who had designed this very house, how her laughter could fill any room. Listening to him, Alara felt safe enough to share her own story, the second piece of their shared puzzle of pain and resilience. Leo's father, he left when I was pregnant, she said, her gaze fixed on the rosebush she was pruning. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. I haven't heard from him since. She spoke without bitterness, her voice colored only by a quiet sadness for the love her son had been denied. It was hard. There were times I didn't know how we'd make it, but then I'd look at Leo, and I knew I had to be strong enough for both of us. He's my whole world. Julian stopped his work and looked at her, his expression one of deep respect and empathy. He saw in her a strength that mirrored his own, a fierce parental devotion that had driven him to build an empire for his family, and had driven her to survive against impossible odds for hers. Their pasts were vastly different in circumstance, but identical in their core motivations: love and sacrifice for a child. You're an incredible mother, Alara, he said, his voice low and sincere. Leo is lucky to have you. The compliment, so simple and earnest, meant more to her than any amount of money ever could. In that shared moment of vulnerability, they ceased to be defined by their past traumas and instead became defined by their shared capacity for love. The roles of employer and employee had long since dissolved, replaced by a deep, unspoken partnership. They were becoming a family, not by blood or by law, but by the quiet, daily acts of caring for one another. They were in a honeymoon phase, a blissful period of domestic harmony where it seemed as if the outside world and its harsh judgments could never touch them. This idyllic peace was shattered by the unexpected arrival of a sleek, dark gray Bentley. It crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway, and from it emerged a woman who radiated an aura of immense power and icy disapproval. She was tall and impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a severe chignon. This was Eleanor Vance, Julian's mother and the matriarch of the Vance dynasty. Eleanor swept into the main house like a conquering general, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She found Julian, Alara, and Leo in the sunroom, laughing over a board game. Her gaze fell upon Alara and Leo, and her perfectly painted lips thinned into a line of undisguised contempt. "Julian," she said, her voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "I came as soon as I heard you were allowing guests. You should have told me." The warmth in the room instantly evaporated. Julian's face hardened, the easy smile vanishing. "Mother, this is Alara Jones, and her son, Leo. Alara is my personal aide." Eleanor gave Alara a dismissive head-to-toe glance that made Alara feel like a bug under a microscope. "An aide," she repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. She ignored Leo completely. "How convenient. I'm sure her duties are very personal." The insinuation was clear and venomous. Alara felt a hot flush of shame and anger. Julian stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Alara and Leo, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by his mother. "That's enough," he said, his tone glacial. "Alara is here at my invitation. She and Leo are to be treated with respect." Over the next few days, Eleanor launched a campaign of psychological warfare. She was a master of the subtle insult, the backhanded compliment, the condescending question. She would ask Alara about her upbringing, in a tone that implied she had been raised by wolves. She would comment on Leo's boisterous energy, remarking how children needed proper discipline and structure, which is often lacking in certain environments. She made it her mission to undermine Alara at every turn, to remind her that she was an outsider, a commoner who had stumbled into a world where she did not belong. The third twist came during a tense dinner. Eleanor had been regaling them with stories of the various high society women she had been introducing Julian to before his unfortunate accident. "Victoria Alastair, for instance," Eleanor said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Her family founded the Alastair Foundation for the Arts. She's beautiful, intelligent, from the right background. She understands the responsibilities that come with a name like Vance. She would have been a perfect partner for you, Julian. A perfect stepmother for a new family. When you were ready." Her meaning was crystal clear. She had been curating a future for her son, a future that involved a woman of equal status and wealth. Alara was not just an unwelcome guest. She was an obstacle, a direct threat to Eleanor's carefully laid plans for the continuation of the Vance legacy. Alara was a nobody, a waitress, a stain on the family's pristine reputation. And Eleanor Vance was a woman who always got what she wanted. She looked across the table at Alara, her eyes glittering with a cold, predatory light. The battle lines had been drawn. Eleanor's campaign of quiet terror escalated into open warfare. Realizing her son would not be swayed by snide remarks alone, she deployed the full, ruthless power of the Vance name. She hired a private investigator to dig into Alara's past, searching for any scrap of dirt she could use as a weapon. And in a life lived on the edge of poverty, there were always scraps to be found. Eleanor discovered the eviction, a handful of unpaid medical bills from when Leo had pneumonia, and the name of Leo's absentee father. She twisted these facts, weaving them into a cruel and distorted narrative. A week later, the story broke. A notorious tabloid, likely fed the information by a source close to the Vance family, ran a shocking cover story. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's Angel of Mercy or Gold-Digging Grifter?" The secret past of Julian Vance's waitress lover. The article painted Alara as a conniving opportunist who had researched Julian's rare blood type, staged the donation, and preyed on a grieving, vulnerable man to escape her life of debt and failure. They printed her photo next to a picture of her old, derelict apartment building. It was a character assassination of the highest order, brutal, public, and utterly humiliating. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The phones at the estate rang off the hook. Vance Industries' board of directors demanded a meeting. The gates of the estate were besieged by paparazzi. Alara felt as though the world was collapsing in on her. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. The shame was a physical poison, seeping into her bones. She saw the way the household staff now looked at her, with suspicion and pity. She knew with a sickening certainty that Eleanor was behind it. The worst part was the fear of what it would do to Julian. She saw the strain on his face, the return of the haunted, weary look she had worked so hard to erase. He was being forced to defend her, to defend himself to the world. His life, which had just begun to find a fragile peace, was now a public circus. And she was the cause. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't let her presence destroy him. She had to remove herself from the equation. That night, after putting a blissfully unaware Leo to bed, she packed their few belongings into a single suitcase. Her hands trembled as she wrote a short note, her tears staining the simple white paper. "Julian, I am so sorry for the trouble I've brought to your door. You and Leo have been the greatest gifts of my life. I can't stay and watch my past ruin your future. Thank you for everything. For your kindness, for your friendship, for letting us into your life. Please don't look for us. We'll be okay. With all my heart, Elara. She folded the note and placed it on the table. Beside it, she laid Leo's favorite drawing. The one of the three of them, Julian, Elara, and Leo, standing in front of the big house under a smiling sun. He had titled it, My Family. It was the only thing of value she had to leave behind. With a final, heartbreaking look around the little cottage that had been their sanctuary, she picked up her sleeping son, wrapped him in a blanket, and slipped out into the darkness. Meanwhile, in the main house, Julian was having a final, explosive confrontation with his mother. "How could you?" he roared, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "How could you do this to her? To an innocent woman?" Eleanor was unrepentant, her posture rigid, her face a mask of cold justification. "I did it for you, Julian, to protect you. That woman is a parasite, a nobody who saw an opportunity and seized it. She is the kindest, most decent person I have ever met," he shot back. "She saved my life and asked for nothing. She brought light back into this house, back into my life. Love is a weakness, Julian." Eleanor's voice rose, cracking with a sudden, shocking vehemence. And then came the final, cruelest twist. "It made you weak before. You were so consumed with Isabella and Lily, you became careless. You weren't paying attention to the business, you weren't paying attention on the road. That's why they died. I will not stand by and watch another woman, especially not that woman, make you weak again. I will not let you be destroyed by sentiment." The monstrous cruelty of her words struck Julian like a physical blow. She was blaming him for the death of his family, twisting his love for them into a fatal flaw. He saw then that his mother's actions weren't about protecting the family legacy. They were about a warped, suffocating control born from her own fear. She would rather see him miserable and alone than happy with someone she deemed unworthy. The fight went out of him, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get out of my house, and out of my life." Just as Eleanor swept out in a fury, Julian saw the light on in the guest house go dark. A terrible premonition seized him. He raced across the lawn, his heart pounding in his chest. He burst into the cottage. It was empty. The suitcase was gone. And then he saw it, the note, and Leo's drawing. He picked up the drawing of their little stick-figure family, and the full weight of what he was about to lose crashed down on him. He had survived the crash, but losing Elara and Leo now would be a death of a different kind. It would be the death of his soul. He would not let his mother's poison win. He would not let Elara go. He grabbed his car keys, his mind racing. Where would she go? A bus station. It was her only way out of the city without a car. As he ran for the garage, he pulled out his phone and made a call to his head of PR. "Call a press conference. Now. I don't care what time it is. Get every major network there. I'm about to make a statement." The press conference was chaos. A throng of reporters and camera crews had assembled outside the gates of Vance Industries headquarters, shouting questions, their flashes popping like fireworks. Julian strode to the podium, his face grim but resolute. He didn't look at his prepared notes. He looked directly into the cameras, into the eyes of the world, and began to speak. "My private life has become a matter of public speculation, based on a series of vicious lies." He began, his voice clear and commanding, silencing the crowd. "So tonight, I am going to tell you the truth." He told them everything. He told them about the lonely diner, the frantic nurse, and the quiet, exhausted waitress who offered up her own lifeblood to a stranger without a moment's hesitation. He told them how he had offered her a fortune, and how she had refused it, asking for nothing in return. "The woman you have slandered in your papers is not a grifter," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "She is a woman of more integrity, strength, and compassion than anyone I have ever known. She is a devoted mother who has fought for every scrap of dignity in a world that gave her none. She didn't prey on me. She didn't target me. She saved me, not just with her blood, but with her kindness. She and her son, Leo, they walked into the darkness of my life and they showed me how to live again. They taught me how to feel again. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the reporters. He knew this was being broadcast live. He hoped, he prayed she was watching. The stories that were printed were a malicious fabrication, planted by a source who I have since removed from my life and my company. They are lies. The truth is this. He looked directly into the main camera. Alara Jones, I love you. You are the strongest, most beautiful soul I have ever met. You have healed a part of me I thought was dead forever. The idea of living my life without you and Leo is unbearable. He took a deep breath, his next words a public vow, a final, grand declaration. I am not asking you to be my aide. I am not asking you to be my companion. Alara, wherever you are, I am asking you to be my wife. Please, come home. He turned and walked away from the podium, leaving behind a stunned and silent press corps. He didn't wait for their reaction. He jumped into his car and sped towards the city's central bus terminal, praying he wasn't too late. He found her on a hard plastic bench under the harsh fluorescent lights of the depot. Leo was asleep in her lap, his face peaceful. Alara was crying silently, her gaze fixed on a small television screen in the waiting area that was replaying his speech. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with disbelief and hope. He stopped in front of her, his heart in his throat. Did you mean it? She whispered. Every word, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt before her, taking her hand. The mansion isn't a home without you and Leo in it. I am not whole without you. Marry me, Alara. Build a life with me. Be my family. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were tears of joy. She looked from his earnest, loving face to her sleeping son, and she knew she was already home. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Julian. Yes. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly on a perfect autumn day. Alara Vance stood beside her husband, Julian, her hand resting on his arm as he spoke at a podium. They were not in front of a throng of reporters, but a grateful crowd of doctors, nurses, and families. They were at the dedication ceremony for the new Isabella and Lily Vance Pediatric Wing of the City Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility entirely funded by a grant from their new foundation. Alara, no longer a waitress in worn-out sneakers, but the co-chair of a major philanthropic endeavor, beamed with a quiet, confident pride. After the ceremony, they walked through the sun-dappled gardens of their estate. Leo, now 6 years old and bubbling with energy, ran ahead, chasing a butterfly. He no longer called Julian by his first name. He called him Dad. Julian stopped and pulled Alara into his arms. Are you happy? He asked, his voice soft. She looked at the beautiful home that was filled with love, at her son, whose future was now bright and limitless, and at the man who had seen her value when she had nothing, the man whose life she had saved, and who, in turn, had saved hers right back. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, she said, her voice full of emotion. She reached up and touched the faint scar on his temple, a small reminder of the night that had changed everything. A simple act of kindness, a pint of blood given freely, had blossomed into this incredible life. It was a testament to the idea that the best parts of ourselves, our compassion, our integrity, are the most valuable things we can ever offer. It proved that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or sprawling estates, but in the quiet, steady beating of a heart filled with love. This story is a powerful reminder that a single act of selfless kindness can create ripples that change the world in ways we can never imagine. It shows that integrity is more valuable than any currency and that love can heal the deepest wounds. If this soul-stirring tale touched your heart, please like and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories that will warm your spirit and restore your faith in humanity.